watching Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear, here as always, alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, as always, great to be back alongside you. Rania, are you muted?
I was muted. Glad you noticed.
Thank you.
I was trying to say it's a pleasure to be back alongside you, Eugene. I've already fumbled the intro, so there's only up from here.
Well,
To
listen,
go.
that's one good way to look at it. Just because you fumble doesn't mean you can't score a touchdown later in the game. So happy to be back here with everyone. Shout out to everyone who is joining us. I will remind you in this moment, if you are watching us on YouTube, just go right ahead and hit the subscribe button. Then make sure you hit the bell so you get the alerts for the things you subscribe to. And make sure you hit that little arrow, that down arrow, to make sure that you have your notifications on. Very important. So that way you don't have to work very hard at all to see all of the great content we have coming out here on Breakthrough News on a regular basis, including dispatches with Rania Khalek. Some great ones have dropped recently. So, you don't want to miss all of that. Don't go now, but certainly after this show is over, definitely go back and check those out. If you're watching us on Free Speech TV, big shout out to you for watching us there. And of course, big shout out to the whole FSTV team for making it possible for us to appear on that platform. And some people might be watching on YouTube, but also on a smart TV. I've learned that a lot of people are watching YouTube on a smart TV. So anyway, I'm just shouting you out for watching on a smart TV and putting us on 72 inches or whatever you have at home. Rania, are there other things that you would like our viewers to know as we get started here?
Yes, I want to remind our viewers that we are an independent media outlet, so you've got to support us in all the ways you can because we depend on your support to keep going and growing. One very easy way you can support us is by smashing that like button. Smash that like button. There it is. It helps boost us in the algorithm. Also, make sure you're subscribed to Breakthrough News. And beyond just subscribing, make sure you hit the bell and then hit personalize or all, so that you get notifications whenever we have new content going up, including my show Dispatches. Had a great new episode yesterday that you can go check out with Dylan Saba about lots of important, scary stuff revolving around U.S. empire. And then if you want to do even more than hit the like button, because you can actually become a member of Breakthrough News and financially support us by going to patreon.com/breakthrough news. For as little as $5 a month, you can become a member and you can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch, including this very cool Breakthrough mug that I always have on hand during our shows and to drink coffee out of. Very stylish stuff. But most importantly, you'll be helping an independent media outlet thrive in a time of just constant corporate disinformation that is cheerleading endless wars and increasing fascism at home. So patreon.com/breakthrough news. You can also donate in the live chat here on YouTube. And for a one-time donation, if you don't want to do like a monthly membership, you can go to breakthroughnews.org and do a one-time donation there.
All right. Well, y'all know what to do. Make it rain. We're going to go ahead and move forward. We've got a great show, as we always do, covering a number of different and crucial, important topics. And we want to start here with a very, very important issue that is related to both ICE and the struggle against the genocide and ethnic cleansing and apartheid in Palestine. Excuse me, sorry about that. Leqaa Kordia is a 33-year-old Palestinian woman from New Jersey, spent nearly a year in what she has deemed torturous ICE detention. Born in East Jerusalem, she was first arrested during the 2024 Gaza Solidarity protests at Columbia University. Charges that were later dropped, but months later, she was taken into custody at a routine immigration check-in in New Jersey, accused of overstaying her student visa, and sent to a detention center in North Texas, where she remains. Recently, Kordia suffered her first ever seizure and was hospitalized for 3 days, shackled the entire time, while ICE refused to inform her family or lawyers of her whereabouts. With calls mounting for her release, we are very happy to be joined here on the show by her cousin, Hamzah, Abushaban, to discuss her condition and fight to bring her home. Hamzah, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, definitely great to have you. Appreciate you coming. And for those who might just be learning about her case, can you just tell us a little bit about who Leqaa is and what you understand about the conditions that she's been enduring here now in ICE detention?
Yeah, so Leqaa Kordia is my cousin. She is the daughter of a U.S. citizen. She is extremely loved by her local community in New Jersey. She's a very caring sister. She's very devoted to her faith. And last but not least, she's unapologetically Palestinian. Um, and just a bird's eye view of why she's even detained right now. The only crime she committed was being Palestinian.
Hmm.
All she's in detention now strictly for speaking up against the genocide that's going on in Gaza right now.
It's just completely outrageous. I mean, it can't be emphasized enough that she has spent a year in jail for her speech in the US and has largely, I mean, I'm sure you and your family have noticed, like, has largely not received the attention that these protesters were getting like a year ago when all this started. Has largely, I don't want to say been forgotten, but there's not headlines about this. It's just utterly shocking. And then I want to also emphasize here, Hamzah, that your family has lost more than 200 relatives in the genocide in Gaza. So can you speak about how this horrific, unimaginable level of loss has shaped your cousin and your family and what it means for her to have been speaking out for Palestine?
Yeah, I mean, let's ask everyone like what it means to be an American,
Hmm.
right? Like why are we all here, right? Everyone here brags about the freedom that we have. Why did Leqaa Kordia come here 10 years ago legally, right? She's seeking freedom. So my entire family, we're all American citizens. I was born and raised in this country. And for the past few years, honestly, between losing family members, that's one pain that Leqaa and I both share. I don't feel free, right? And knowing that a loved one in my family has been detained and the effects that it has on her mother, her brother, myself, my everyday life, my father, my mother, for what? For protesting against a genocide, right? I don't feel free as an American citizen. So yes, losing family members in Gaza, it sucks, right? We all mourn that. But to add fuel to the fire, this past year has been nothing but dehumanizing for all of us, right? And if anyone knows Leqaa, she's like the last person that will harm anyone. All she did was be proud to be an American, be proud to be in America, and protested.
No, I think that's such an important point, and I'm glad you laid out the fact that she came here legally, and it just seems, to maybe extend the point that you're making. What does it mean to you that someone who is being targeted really just for speaking out, I mean, against a genocide at that, can be, jailed and held, seemingly indefinitely, in terrible conditions?
Yeah, so I don't care if you're on the far right or if you're on the far left or you're somewhere in the middle. I don't care what you believe in, what your faith is. If you live in this country and you respect America, you have to respect the Constitution of the United States, right? That she's clearly detained for practicing and exercising her First Amendment right, which is freedom of speech in the form of protest, right? She was neither a student at Columbia. She's not a political activist by any means necessary. She is an innocent person that felt that the least that she can do at that time after losing 200 family members is simply protest. So
Mm.
this is at its core a serious this is a very serious American issue, right? Whether you're pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, pro-right, pro-MAGA, pro-left, it does not matter. This is an American issue. Why? Because we all should have the right to speak up for what we believe in, right? And that's exactly what Leqaa did. And it ultimately led her to be in detention for nearly a year now.
Mm.
And at its core, that's the biggest problem that's going on in this country right now.
So, with regard to the current status of her detention, And obviously you all are fighting for her freedom. Can you mind kind of like give us an update of what the situation is for her right now legally? I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think she's one of the last, if not the last, like person who's still in detention of the people who were swept up last year by ICE. So if you could kind of just give us an idea of what the situation is right now, and then what are you calling on from ICE and the Trump administration to do? And I guess, sorry, this is like going to be three-pronged, but maybe also can you let people know how they can support her and stand in solidarity with your family?
Yeah, it's a good question. So how to support her? I would say follow her Instagram page, which is free Leqaa Kordia. There's a bunch of links and petitions that you can sign. You could donate to her shuff.com page there. I would say in terms of her legal status now, I'll defer that to the legal team. But I will mention that what's happened legally, right? And the reason why I keep bringing it back to this being an American issue is DHS has no regard for our own judicial system. She was ordered twice, released on bond, right? First time the bond was posted within 24 hours. The second time I tried paying for it in person, they wouldn't even allow me to post a bond. And both times, DHS just simply checks the box saying, no, actually, we changed our mind and filed something called an automatic stay, right? So that's where she's at legally now. And her legal team, full army ready to fight for her in terms of going through the legal system and appealing these decisions made by DHS. Her current conditions, and I want to be clear, because if Leqaa was listening right now, she would want me to say this. It's not just her. It's everyone in these detention centers. She's told me stories about people who are pregnant, people who have terminal illness, irreversible toxicities from being in there. She's 33 years old and she just experienced her first seizure ever, right? And that's because lack of sleep, lack of malnutrition, lack of practicing her faith. And that's ultimately what got her there. The ask from the family is to release her right now. Right? Respect those judges' orders. Release her on bond right now. She shouldn't have spent a single day in that detention center. It's taken a toll on her spirit, her entire family, myself, my family, all for exercising a constitutional right of freedom of speech. It's ridiculous.
Wow.
Well, lastly, sorry, if you
please.
can just direct our audience to where they can go to perhaps show solidarity to her and your family.
Yeah, I think a good starting place would be her Instagram page, which is free Leqaa Kordia. And then there's a bunch of petitions and ways to support there. Give it a follow. And then also reach out to your local leaders, reach out to your elected officials and make them make noise in DC, right? Because she was the second person detained after Mahmoud Khalil, and she's the last. Right. And there's no difference from what she's done. She simply stood up for what she believed in to be right. And that's her American constitutional right to do so. So I urge everyone that cares about this case, that cares about the Constitution, to reach out to your local officials and try to make as much noise as possible to put pressure on DHS and actually follow the law.
Yeah, well, critically important story, and we will continue to cover it. Hamzah, we really appreciate you joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Rania?
Man, their poor family. That's just horrifying. Like a year over. I mean, this February is exactly a year, and just the deterioration of her health. And I mean, I hate to say it, but it's true. The media has totally like dropped off on this story. It was like a sexy story last year when it started, because as most things that happen under the Donald Trump administration are, because they're just so outrageous, the sweeping up and kidnapping basically, and then detention of all of these student protesters, with Mahmoud Khalil being the most high profile. But it's just like the last person still there, just kind of rotting away, and the media has just lost interest. It's absolutely horrific.
No, I agree with you 100%. And it's like, and this is what they want, ICE and these other people in the Trump administration, is they want to scare people into thinking, well, this is what's going to happen to you. So you better not say anything if you want to speak out, especially if you're someone on a green card or some other form of legal status that's just slightly below citizenship. But I mean, and also to detain someone at like your regular check-in. So it's like you come into the country and they say, well, here are the rules to be in the country. And then you follow the rules and then they arrest you and hold you in detention for a year I mean, I think it's fair to call them torturous conditions.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we know it from all of the reports that have come out. We've interviewed people who are basically experts on what's happening inside of these. I mean, detention centers isn't even the right word because I feel like it sounds just very bland and almost neutral, like a detention center. It's like these are like basically just concentration camps where people are packed in like sardines. They're given moldy food, like, if they're given food at all. And you have people coming out with all kinds of ailments and illnesses because the situation in terms of health is just horrific, not, being given soap or, anything to like, be sanitary. And you've got sexual assaults taking place in these concentration camps. And then, as we spoke to our guest last week about this, you have so much, all of these people who are at the same time, like potentially going to be detained, in larger numbers because you have this dramatic expansion by the Trump DHS to like build these massive warehouses to put people in. And then, I don't think that's going to stay limited to immigrants.
No, I don't think so at all. And I mean, as you were pointing out in one of your questions, I mean, we've seen a number of people who've been targeted, obviously, for speaking out for Palestine, even though they claim it's about immigration. Although, let's remember, they're saying that's why they want to kick people out of the country because certain things are verboten. If you're an immigrant, you're not supposed to speak out, according to Marco Rubio and others, which is totally absurd. I wonder how many people have come from various countries that the U.S. hates that are here on green cards who speak out all the time and they're not being arrested. It's flown under the radar, but it has to be noted that amongst those who have been arrested, we've seen a number of labor organizers also targeted, people from Central America in particular, all across the country. So there's definitely a political element to this already. And I think your point is very well taken. It's like once you set up these massive systems, like, what's to stop them from continuing to expand them and push them in different ways. And I think we've seen historically in this country, whether it's the Japanese internment issue, whether it's slavery, whether it's Jim Crow, like they'll find a way legally if they want to erode people's, just basic human dignity in service of these malign goals. I mean, it really is unbelievable. But I think we can move to our next topic here, which is also critically important and just also, I guess we shouldn't say it's unbelievable, but just outrageous in my view about what's happening here. And that's the everything that's happening regarding Cuba in this country. Since January of this year, Donald Trump has labeled Cuba a quote unquote extraordinary threat to U.S. security and escalated the decades-long blockade. It's a new phase of the long-going economic warfare there against Cuba by the United States. In U.S.-engineered crisis now unfolding on the island, Washington has cut off Cuba's access to oil, to fuel. They're threatening any country that is saying that it will be willing to provide them with these things that they need to be able to run their economy. So to break all this down and talk more about it, are very happy to be joined by Arnold August, who's the author of several books on Cuba, including Democracy in Cuba. And Arnold, as always, great to have you with us.
Thank you very much for having me. Talking about concentration camps, how many of us amongst our listeners know that the very first concentration camp was organized by the United States during its occupation of Cuba? And it was one of the main struggles against which the fighters fought against to finally win liberation in 1959. And of course, Trump and those who have that similar option want Cuba to go back to that. That's just my small intro.
Yeah, well, it's an important intro and it's important history. I think a lot of people don't even know that the U.S. was occupying Cuba. And I want to start here, Arnold, by asking a question, a framing question. And, a lot of how Cuba is portrayed around the world, certainly in the United States, as you know very well, is that it's this authoritarian dictatorship that, everyone is under the thumb of the, Castro family and a few other ruling elites. But you've written extensively about this issue. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about that framing and the actual issue of democracy in Cuba.
Yes. To put it in a proper framework, I believe the first thing is to do away with that cobweb that often comes up in the minds of people if Cuba is more democratic than the United States or whatever. I don't think that one can compare it. It's like comparing apples and oranges. In the case of Cuba, they had an armed uprising that succeeded on January 1st, 1959, after many years of struggle, including the previous century, when Cuba had 4 constitutions voted upon by the people in the Republic of Arms that all led up to the January 1st, 1959 revolution, armed revolution, which, amongst other things, did away with the very fabric of dictatorship at that time, and that is the complete control by the US, British, and other of the countryside, and confiscated all of that land to give it back to those who tilled it, as well as confiscating the oil refineries, the banks, etc. So Cuba went from a dictatorship under the US, and including concentration camps previously and other atrocities, to a country where they were able to clear away the economic control over the country. Now, sometimes the level is claimed, why didn't Cuba have elections? Well, this reminds me of that the book that you just mentioned, my book, first book published in 1999, where I quote Fidel Castro, a very interesting speech that he gave in January 1959, just several weeks after the successful revolution, when we hear him ask the people, a mass gathering, as is normal, he has carried out, as part of that new democracy in Cuba. Hey, what do you think about elections? That was actually booed down. I quote this in my book. It was booed down by the audience, not because they didn't want elections, not because they were authoritarian in nature, but all the Cuban people had in terms of direct experience with elections was the one organized under the U.S. tutelage. And it's pretty much similar to the ones that you have in the United States and other countries. You have basically 2 parties. When one party was discredited, they would discard it and push the same policy into another party, sort of a replacement of the old party. Now, so Cuba, of course, it only had elections in 1974, 1976. Now, what is important, we talk about elections and democracy in Cuba. People are pretty much fixated on the issue of democracy, the election of Miguel Diaz-Canel as president of the republic, etc. But I think that if you want to look at democracy in Cuba, one has to look at, as I gave the example in 1959, Fidel Castro actually interacting with the people to make a decision to not hold elections at that time, because they were involved in other things like agrarian reform, fighting illiteracy, building health, etc. Now, the main feature of the Cuban system, I believe, is its participatory nature. Under the current situation, my sources in Havana told me that there's been a change in terms of how the delegates work now under these new conditions at the municipal level. For the municipal assemblies, how do elections take place? They take place, first step is the nomination by the people in the actual neighborhoods, open voting in the neighbors who they think should be nominated to be elected to the municipal assembly, and they must have between 1 and 8 people nominated. And then you have elections taking place, secret ballot elections take place, and one of those 8 people are elected to the municipal assembly. Now, what is interesting today, why I'm raising it now, is that now these people who are elected, in order to maintain the close ties between the elected people at the municipal level and their grassroots origins, is they have to keep on working, and they only deal with their municipal responsibility as delegates after work hours, which makes it pretty limited. But just a few days ago, my sources tell me this has been changed. To take into account the current situation, these delegates, or most of these delegates, are now liberated from their work in order to devote themselves full-time to the current situation. Sure, for us it may be clear, but there's maybe a lot of confusion. There's so much ideological work being done against the Cuban Revolution. The people need discussion, clarity from people who are aware of the situation. So these elected delegates now, when it's supposed to be a dictatorship, they have more time to spend with their citizens in their area in order to deal with the current situation.
It's also not to mention, also just to bring into to play here that in addition to sort of like the municipal participatory democracy that you're talking about, Cuba also has economic rights that in the U.S. we're not, we don't even think about being a part of our democratic rights as citizens. But in Cuba, it's enshrined. People have access to shelter and healthcare and things that, you have no right to in the U.S. But, Arnold, I do want to ask you, in addition to sort of the idea that Cuba's this repressive dictatorship that's just so horrific and everything's bad, that sort of discourse you hear in the U.S., they also tend to talk about Cuba as though all of its problems are a result of like this horrible, corrupt dictatorship, when you have decades and decades of documented U.S. interference, whether in really ridiculous and absurd ways, and then covert ways that most people have never heard of. I'm curious if you could just maybe walk us through some of like the highlights of how the U.S. has tried to destroy the Cuban Revolution since its inception. I mean, I know we would need hours to actually go through all of the ways, but maybe just like an abridged, quick version for our audience.
Very quick, abridged version. In 1959, 1960, right after the success of the revolution, we have that famous statement by Subsecretary Mallory, in which he openly said, he admitted, we have a problem here in Cuba. Everyone supports Fidel Castro. There's no organized opposition. So what we have to do is to create misery and lowering living standards in order for people to become dissatisfied and rise up against the government to be blamed for this situation. The only thing that has been changed since that 1959, 1960 statement are two other pieces of legislature, 1992, 1996, which codify the Mallory statement into law. And what is the key word in those statements? Both have as a common denominator, democracy, to bring democracy to Cuba. And I think that this is, it's difficult to put into words everything the United States has done to destroy the Cuban Revolution economically. We know right now, in the most difficult situation since the change that took place in Venezuela on January 29th, the Trump administration actually issued a law making it illegal. They will sanction any country that will help Cuba get fuel in any way, shape, or form. This is a major problem and is added on to the problems that have been accumulated since the beginning. And you talk about, yeah, sure, there are problems in Cuba. And I just read a very interesting article. First of all, when we talk about elections and democracy, I would like to mention one point. There's often, we think of, the president or even the municipal assemblies, but as another aspect as well that is not part of the electoral system. Let me give you the example of the Comité de Defensa de la Revolución, which are revolutionary committees in each neighborhood right across Cuba, which was established in 1960 when there was explosions taking place while Fidel Castro was giving a speech. And the people said spontaneously, we have to go into our communities, get ourselves organized and armed to defend ourselves against any provocation that's taking place. Now, this is very important. The role of the CDR, the Comité de Defensa de la Revolución, which is not, properly speaking, part of democracy, part of the electoral system. As we speak now, I read an important article in Cuba Debate yesterday, it's only in Spanish so far, how they give details how foreign influence based on Meta, Instagram, Facebook, etc., are trying to foster violence in the streets of Havana as we speak. They detail hundreds and hundreds of bots from these foreign elements to try to foster violence and demonstrations within Cuba between the 1st and the 15th of this month. Now, we have experience with this. If we recall, July 21st, 2021, July 11th, 2021, there were those famous uprisings in Cuba, which are in the main, some of it was spontaneous because there's a problem of COVID and other issues, but in the main fostered and encouraged by these type of bots in that period to organize violent actions against Cuba to create chaos. That it was finally stopped. And then those same people attempted to get another chaos-driven movement going called 15th of November with the hashtag 15 de November, 15 November, in order to try to get some kind of action going in the streets of Cuba. Now, how was it stopped? Not by elections. It was stopped mainly by the Comité de Defensa de la Revolución. At that time, it was headed by Gerardo Hernandez, one of the Cuban heroes who was imprisoned in the United States for many decades, and of course, a lot of experience. And what they did at that time, through the Comité de Defensa de la Revolución, which is not part of the electoral system as such, they carried out mass discussions meetings in every neighborhood across Cuba. Now, the problem is for the United States and their enemies, their followers live in those neighborhoods, and they were able to see with their own eyes. They were able to feel that mass movement there, that the Cuban people did not want, yes, there are problems, but they do not want the U.S.-driven challenge to the system in order to foster regime change. So there are many features of democracy in Cuba and how it works, both the elections and, of course, the actual elections as such.
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned that, Arnold, and especially the issue of challenges, because, starting at the end of 2025, there was this mass consultation that was begun around government proposals for how to tackle economic crises. And this is also a huge feature of Cuba that I feel almost no country around the world has anything like this, to my knowledge, where like really the whole population is able to participate in discussions on like the foundational fundamental lines of the government, the Constitution, and so on and so forth.
Actually, that's a very important point. I mean, let's compare this, if I may, to the United States, in which the people never voted on their constitution. Now, in Cuba, people voted on the Constitution first in 1976, and there were many referendums that took place on the economic reforms, as you just mentioned, not to mention important reforms to the family code. All of this was discussed at the grassroots level, at the level of the neighborhoods, led to a large extent by the CDRs and the local delegates. So people have a say in the day-to-day running of the country and to make important decisions. And therefore, if the U.S. is trying to create a chaos out of the current situation by blaming it on the Cuban people, I think this will fall on deaf ears. I just read an important article this morning in Gramma. It's not yet in English, by Raul Capote. He asked what the United States wants, and it's very interesting. What he said, what they want, they cannot openly create a regime change. What they want is to create doubt and a lack of confidence in the Cuban people. I think that's a very important point. That, I think, the current goal is. United States, they may want to have regime change, as Rubio said, but when questioned, well, we want it, but it's not going to be us. And when Trump was asked, are you ready to use military power in Cuba? He said, well, I don't think so. Why? Because they're aware, despite all their their bluster and their showing of confidence, they know that Cuba is not easy to take away. They know that there's not easy to have a regime change in Cuba. And I think this is what's happening now, is they're trying to create doubt and confusion. That's why they've issued what some say is a trial balloon, that there are negotiations taking place between Raul Castro's son-in-law and Marco Rubio with regards to some kind of a deal taking place, which of course was denied by the Cuban side. But they're trying to create doubt and, as Raul Capote said, a doubt as well as lack of confidence that they could overcome the situation. But that's not what's happening. I've seen photographs of people as an alternative to oil, petrol, the workers and the farmers are working together with the technicians to build these solar energy parks around the country, as well in different localities, because this is the alternative. Now, if Cuba can hang on for another 6 months, another year, Cuba might have another revolution, and that is a revolution in terms of energy, not relying on fossil fuels, but relying on the sun, which many have said the United States cannot block the sun. But we'll have to see how things goes. I guess it depends to a certain extent on the midterm elections. Will there be a blowback against the hard line by Washington against Cuba, against which many members of Congress in the United States have already taken a stand? We will see.
Absolutely. Well, Arnold, as always, we appreciate you joining us. We appreciate your scholarship and your ongoing work to help illuminate what's really going on the island. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you very much for having me.
Rania?
Well, I certainly hope that, if things are going to change during the midterms, it just makes me so sad that how much suffering will have taken place in Cuba until then. I mean, it's just no fuel out into the country since December. I mean, having lived through fuel crises here in Lebanon, and knowing what that looks like I think, there was the summer of 2021. There was no fuel coming into the country for other reasons that are different from what's happening in Cuba. But all that's to say, I mean, it really just causes daily life to come to a halt in the most destructive, uncomfortable, and just traumatic ways you can imagine. And it's just all that intentional destruction of people's lives. So Marco Rubio and, American ruling class freaks can, I don't know, just kick an island nation. Because they don't like its economic system. It's insane.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And it's and you look at the countries where, they claim are great, because, Rubio was on the Sunday shows and he was like, well, they can't run the economy in Cuba, blah, 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 blah. Well, what's happening in Argentina where, they say Malay is so great and poverty is skyrocketing? You've got the police who are brutally beating pensioners on the street, senior citizens, who are just trying to demand the right for their pensions to have value so that they can afford food and shelter and the most basic things. I mean, I could go on and on when you look at all these other countries that they claim are so great in Latin America, where, they don't even have anything remotely like the social protections that Cubans have been given. And I think the nature of this blockade, it's they can't pick up the trash because they can't have the fuel for the trash truck. So things that they would already do. And then what's the add-on to that is that then, of course, when you have trash on the street, it can breed disease. And then what's the add-on to that? When you can't operate the healthcare system, then people start to die. So, I mean, this is really a terroristic, genocidal policy on the United States that is designed to destroy the Cuban people. And before we move on, AJ Plus did a on the street interview, and there was a young man they interviewed, and he made an interesting point. He said, I don't want U.S. intervention because we've seen what that's done. And the two countries he mentioned were very interesting. He mentioned Hawaii and Puerto Rico, which, one is an amazing just educational piece there, but I think just very notable one about the education system in Cuba, that they actually know about the colonization of Hawaii and Puerto Rico, how many Americans know about that, but the keen understanding of what the American policy is that it really is a colonial policy designed to turn the country into, Hawaii and Puerto Rico, a playground for rich Americans, Europeans, Canadians, and others to come to take all the best housing, all the best land, to force everyone else to be some sort of, whatever, person making no money. They have no social services in these places. Anyway, it's just a terrible state of affairs. But I could go on and on about this all day. Unfortunately, we have to move on, but we will continue to cover this very, very closely, as we have continued to for many, many years. So thanks to Arnold August and all the other guests we've had on who have helped illuminate the reality of what's going on. We want to move here now to the class struggle in the United States. After weeks of mass protests, strikes, and nationwide outrage, the Trump administration has announced an end to Operation Metro Surge, the largest federal immigration enforcement campaign in recent U.S. history that deployed thousands of Department of Homeland Security agents from various parts of that agency to Minnesota. The operation, of course, was marked by the fatal shootings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, and it drew national and international
Oh,
opposition, a massive set of that, of course, also.
Sorry, Eugene, you had frozen for me for a moment, but now I can hear you again. So continue. Maybe back up for like a sentence of what you were saying.
Well, let's just get right to it here. Let's just get right to it. We have Dr. Ben Becker, the editor-in-chief of Breakthrough News, with us. So let's just go to him on immigration and the outcome of Operation Metro Surge. Dr. Ben, thanks so much for being back with us.
Thanks for having me again.
Well, always great to have you. I mean, it's sort of a notable factor what took place, the so-called drawdown. I mean, I know that there's still some ICE agents that are there in Minnesota, but ending the massive surge, also taking a more conciliatory line from the Trump administration when they'd come in so sharply. And I think a lot of people would say, well, you got to vote in the Democrats, you got to have elections if you want to make change. But it seems that there is another force that entered the chat, so to speak, that heavily altered the desire of the Trump administration to crack down on Minneapolis.
Yeah, absolutely. It was the factor of essentially a general strike. It went by the name of no school, no shopping, no work, or some were calling it a shutdown, a day of truth and freedom. It didn't exactly use the term general strike, but look at that video next to me there. I mean, you can see the scale of the operation. I mean, the scale of the people's response was massive in Minnesota. It's been massive before. There have been resistance everywhere that ICE has gone, whether they went to Charlotte, Los Angeles, Chicago, New Orleans, Washington, D.C., wherever they've been, there have been people's resistance. But I think Minnesota took it to a whole different level in terms of both the mass mobilization and these pictures that you're seeing. This is in like negative 20-degree weather, and also the level of block by block organization, the ICE watch, the people with the whistles, the people recording. ICE could not take a single step in Minnesota, and still can't take a single step in Minnesota without being surrounded by angry people. And in a state that's known for Minnesota nice, this was they flipped it on its head by just being everywhere ICE was, whether they were trying to go to a restaurant, whether they're trying to refuel their cars, anywhere they popped out, the people popped out too. And of course, that's because of the level of organization, grassroots organizing, but also just the level of consciousness in the state of Minnesota, where I think a lot of people identify with being from a state that's welcomed lots of refugees now for decades. And they just don't want ICE there. And they were not afraid to show it, even when 2 of them were killed. And I think a lot of people saw Renee Nicole Good or Alex Purdy, they saw themselves in them as individuals, people who they shared commitments with, people who were volunteering their time, and people who were executed in cold blood out in the street on video. And that just made people turn up even more. It didn't actually intimidate them. The demonstrations after they were killed were larger than the demonstrations before they were killed. The number of people doing ICE Watch was more than before. So, I think we don't want to make it seem like Trump and Tom Homan have waved the white flag. They haven't done that, and they're never going to do that. Their whole political style is to claim everything as a victory, no matter what happens. And of course, it's not like a military battle in the sense where you're going to have one army literally flee and take their flag down, and another army put their flag up and say we won. But in political terms, there's no doubt that Operation Metro Surge in Minnesota has been a political defeat for the Trump administration. And ICE has not left totally, not at all, actually. In some ways, they've just changed their tactics. They've moved out to the suburbs. They're trying to strike deals with local jails so that they can take people sort of in private who are already in custody. They're doing things like trying to trick people. I saw an article today where 2 women went up to the house of a mechanic, a man from Mexico, popped open their hood and said, "Oh, we're having car problems. Can you come out?" And the guy comes out, and then ICE comes in with a swarm of cars to arrest them, because they know that people aren't going to open for ICE, so they have to trick them to come out of their houses. So they're up to all their same dirty tricks, and we shouldn't, I think, minimize, the sort of humanitarian damage that they continue to do, all the families that are still being terrorized and so forth. But I think this was by far the largest ICE operation in history. This was 3,000 in a fairly small area. I mean, not small, but medium-sized city. 3,000 ICE and Border Patrol agents, almost 10 times the size of Chicago. And yet, when you look at the number of arrests they've been able to make, the number of deportations, and also just sort of the political impact they've been made, they've come in far short of what they were projecting, far short of their expectations. It's been kind of a disaster of an operation in those terms. And I think that's 100% due to the level of response and mobilization from the people of Minnesota. It's not that Governor Walz was particularly, resistant compared to other governors, or Mayor Frey in Minneapolis was particularly, resistant compared to other mayors. It was that the people of Minnesota were more organized, more mobilized, and fired up. And that has really inspired the whole country.
I mean, all of that is so incredibly important, Ben. And I actually want to ask you more directly to elaborate on a piece you wrote. You wrote this piece for Liberation News called "How the ICE Surge Was Defeated in Minnesota: Lessons of the Strike and Shutdown Movement." And like you said, Trump and Homan, they're not waving the white flag, which means the struggle is certainly not over. It's going to continue, as you just mentioned. By the way, the story you just told, the insane story you just told about women posing as having their car break down to lure people out so ICE could arrest them. I mean, fascists act the same everywhere. It just made me think of the Israelis in Gaza playing the cries of babies on like speakers to lure people to come out, because people are going to come help babies. People are going to come help women whose car broke down. It's just sick. But to speak to that, I mean, this is an ongoing struggle because they're going to continue to escalate. I mean, they were defeated in Minnesota, but they're going to continue to escalate around the country with their policies. So I think it's more important than ever to talk about the lessons of what took place in Minneapolis and how they can be applied down the road. So tell us about that. Tell us about the sort of most important aspects that we should take away when it comes to these lessons. People should go read your piece for like more detail, but if you had to.
Yeah, I didn't personally write it, but I totally agree with it.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I thought your name was on it.
No, but it's okay. I totally agree with it. And I think the key lesson is really that, that working class people of all backgrounds, that we actually do have a collective weapon that we have not utilized for decades, that makes us, and the fact that we have not utilized it makes us feel powerless, makes us feel like there's nothing we can do, makes us feel like spectators in politics. And that weapon is to withhold our labor, to withhold our ability to shop, our ability to basically be the many who can disrupt society's normal operation. And that has happened in Minnesota. Of course, it was actually ICE that came and really disrupted the normal economy. I saw an estimate that there were $81 million in lost revenue for Minnesota businesses because of the Operation ICE, the Operation Metro Surge, and 47 million in lost wages for Minnesota workers. That's not because of the general strike. That's because of ICE terrorizing so many immigrant workers. They basically ground the economy to a halt. And this is, meanwhile, just to really go through some of the costs, the operation itself is expected to cost $230 million over 2 months in federal tax dollars. So the whole Trump administration argument, which is that like us deporting all these immigrant workers is somehow going to resuscitate a better quality of life for the American working class and middle class. It's going to make rents come down. It's going to make food cheaper. No matter what question you ask the Trump administration during the 2024 campaign, they said, well, we're going to do mass deportations and that's going to help. But actually what's happened is this operation and this sort of insane attack on the immigrant community has just messed up the economy everywhere while costing federal tax dollars to the tune of, again, $230 million over 2 months. And what's it all for? To deport a few thousand people. I saw an estimate that there were like 3,000 to 4,000 arrests made in Operation Metro Surge. So basically 1 arrest per ICE agent that went there. And that's what you're getting for, and I'm not saying any of them should be, but I just mean the scale of the terror that they've unleashed compared to what the number of people they're actually taking. I saw one estimate that there were even only 23 Somalis have been arrested in this whole thing. So you launch like basically a massive war of terror against the Somali community. Why? Because of these like ridiculous, like sort of racist scapegoating, even though most of the community is citizens or green card holders. And that's one of the reasons they were able to hold so strong. And so it's really only for sort of the racist optics that they've done this. But the main lesson really is that you don't have to wait until the elections to be able to start taking action. And you actually have power now. And I think that, you know, looking at the Trump administration, doom scrolling at night, waking up to doom scroll some more. There's always a new war. There's always a new federal occupation. There's always something. He's always talking about arresting his political opponents, any dissidents. It can feel just overwhelming, like you can't do anything. I think that's just a completely natural feeling. But the fact that people have actually done something, now the Trump administration says they're not going to deploy to any more Democratic cities, for instance, unless they're asked to. That's because they realize every time they do this now, there could be more general strikes. There could be mass marches. Their approval ratings can sink even more. So that's the real lesson, is that organizing matters, resistance matters, that Trump is not infallible. He likes to present himself that way, but he's not.
No, it's a great point. And sorry, I was looking down because I just wanted to get this correct quote, because I think another point that you're making here, especially the latter point about their approval ratings go down. Well, I just have to give you credit because you actually sent me this poll. But, you know, interesting poll from Third Way, which is like a centrist democratic thing. So this is not, you know, like communism here. These are people who, you know, are not to the left. But they did a poll of young men. And of course, you know, there's been this, you know, I don't even know what to call it, the like scare campaign that somehow young men are all, you know, becoming fascist or whatever. Anyway, here's the point. They noted that among the top concerns of young men, of all races, you know, whatever, just the broader people they polled, of course, healthcare was number one, which I think is interesting. But they noted that 60% were alarmed by the fact that Trump had expanded immigration raids to target anyone who looks or sounds foreign. I wanted to just quote it directly to get that right, because the looks or sounds foreign is important, because there might be people who would say, oh, well, it's like they think he's not doing too much. But 60% of young men are like deeply concerned that this racist mass deportation campaign is ongoing. I remember there was a poll, I think it was actually before Renee Good was killed, about the level of support for the protest against ICE. And I think if you extrapolate it out to US adults, it was like 123 million people or something like that, or 120 odd million. And of course, both presidential candidates only got 70 some million votes in the course of it. So the point I'm making here is not only is it a minority position, but it does feel like this extreme racist, white supremacist core of so many of these Trump administration policies is just not popular, despite how this is often sold. And obviously, America is a very racist country, that increasingly people don't like that and want to see that change. And this seems to be another reflection of that.
Yeah, and I think, look, they have power. They have control over all these executive agencies. They can pretty much do whatever they want. So it can make it feel like they have like the wind at their backs and they have all this social support. But that's why I think these polls are important. The fact that Trump was essentially ahead among young men a year ago, or January 2025, he had a +10 approval rating, and now it's like -32. So that's a 42-point swing among young men. I think that's a different demographic in general than people who voted for Trump in 2016, 2020, 2024. A lot of these people were, a lot of these young men were just teenagers in 2016. Might not have experienced it. They might have been drawn in by his sort of entertainment factor, or his anti-political correctness, or who knows what, or whatever podcast they're listening to. There could be a lot of reasons why people could be totally checked out from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, which is basically all the presidential vote registers, is like, which of these two figures do you consider to be the least bad, and then you vote for the other one. But that's why these issue-based polls, I think, are quite interesting. The fact that that there isn't like this massive support for Trump. He does have a hardcore base that I don't think is going anywhere, that's almost unshakable at this point. But that represents maybe 30 to 35% of the population. So you know, it's important that these mass demonstrations continue to take place, in part because they are a visual reflection of the fact that the outrage you are feeling personally at home is not exceptional. Because that can be kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that people feel like, how is no one mad about this? How is no one angry? Am I the only one who's outraged? Like, no, you're actually not the only one who's outraged. And the state of Minnesota really showed that the whole state was outraged. And I don't think that's going away. I mean, I think wherever ICE goes now, Minnesota's kind of raised the bar. And you look, Bovino, who is kind of like a cartoonish fascist figure, him being demoted, it doesn't change anything fundamentally about ICE, but it's a reflection of the fact that even the Trump administration was feeling that heat. There's growing calls for Kristi Noem to resign, even within the Republican Party. I think a lot of people feel that Stephen Miller is totally unhinged. Even people who have rode with Trump up to this point are like, how is Stephen Miller really controlling domestic policy? So these new contradictions are not coming about because of the moral conscience of the Republican Party. These new contradictions are emerging because of the social pressure has changed. The social situation has changed.
So to that end, I want to ask about the Democratic Party, because you know we know that there's a pattern of these kind of establishment Democrats trying to like absorb and redirect that movement momentum into electoral politics that benefit them. And I do think obviously, like, definitely it's horrible for Trump and Stephen Miller and Marco Rubio to be in power. There's no question about that. But, historically, the Democrats have really learned well how to take that momentum, not just redirect it into electoral politics, but that's kind of where it goes to die. And then nothing really changes. And then we just end up with Republicans in power again the next round and in the same situation. So all that's to say, what would be the lesson? And this isn't just a lesson from this moment, it's a lesson from past moments as well. Yes. What would be the lesson in how to resist that sort of co-optation by the Democratic Party so we don't end up in the same sort of cycle of Republicans and Democrats, and that pendulum, even though it's moving back and forth, still taking us all right?
No, totally. You're totally right. I mean, the last sort of comparable day to this national shutdown on January 30th, the general strike on January 23rd, was the day without an immigrant in 2006, when millions of immigrants, really led in the immigrant community in 2006, didn't go to work and shut down huge parts of the economy. But the Democratic Party swooped in, even though they didn't really create the movement, but they swooped in and they advanced their own slogans, for instance, which was, today we march, tomorrow we vote. And the idea was, if you just get us into office in the midterms in 2006, this was under Bush, we will pass comprehensive immigration reform and create a pathway to legalization for the 11 to 12 million undocumented immigrants. And I think a lot of people believe that. And the Obama phenomenon, the Democratic Party victory in the 2006 midterms, a lot of it had to do with this sort of unprecedented mobilization within immigrant communities in support of the Democrats. And yet here we are 20 years later, 20 years, this May will be coming up in the anniversary. There's still been no comprehensive immigration reform, even though the Democratic Party several times has had majority control of the House, Senate, and the White House. So they've had their opportunity to do that, and they've completely betrayed and disappointed the immigrant community. And in fact, Obama created record numbers of deportations once in office. So that sort of disenchantment with the Democratic Party for its inability to follow through on its promises is part of the reason for the Trump phenomenon to begin with, I would say, and the sort of rise of the right. So we have to learn that lesson. On the other hand, the fact of the two-party system makes it such that the Democratic Party is going to be a beneficiary of this anti-Trump sentiment no matter what, just because people want to deal a blow to MAGA. And that's just sort of the unfortunate reality of what currently exists. I mean, the Democratic Party could basically just be a corpse. It could be a bunch of people who don't even talk, and they could still win the elections in a lot of places because people want to deal a blow to MAGA right now. And so this is a part of how American politics is structured. I'm a total supporter of third parties and of left-wing socialist parties And, there have to be political instruments that reflect the mass movement. And if you don't create your own independent political instruments while you're doing all this mass organizing, it's inevitably going to be co-opted once you get to November. So I think that is going to be the big task of this year, is to say, like, we have to learn the lesson. We can't do today we march, tomorrow we vote. It should be today we march, tomorrow we march, every day we march that we need to. And when we're going to vote, we're only going to vote for candidates who totally embrace our program. And, if you read the diagnostics and the postmortems of the Democratic Party after 2024, they said, the reason we lost was because we got too liberal on immigration. They said, we said abolish ICE. We should have never said that. People don't believe that. And, Trump really resonated with people with his attacks on mass migration and blah, blah, blah. And look, there's, of course, kernels of truth to different elements of it. But the main message that's come out of the Democratic Party is we should throw immigrants under the bus and not talk about these issues anymore. And if we just talk about the cost of living, that's the way we win. And if we talk about immigration, that benefits the right. Well, now, a year later, you have a state that's 76% white going on a general strike in defense of immigrants. You have the immigration numbers for Trump plummeting. You have the most dynamic mass pro-immigrant movement that's been seen in decades. And now the Democratic Party is turning around and saying, well, we have to find ways to absorb this energy. So we have to understand what's happening here. They really are two-faced on this question. Even the government shutdown right now, they're not really going to see it through to lift up the demands of the movement. They're trying to do just enough to absorb some of that energy for their own electoral fortunes.
Actually, while we have you on that, Ben, I know we're going a little over time here, but I want to, if possible, play a clip for you, because I think it speaks perfectly. It encapsulates perfectly what you're talking about. It's Hillary Clinton speaking very recently about deportations. And she has some words. Let's hear her words.
More people were deported under my husband and Barack Obama without killing American citizens and without putting children into detention camps than were in the first Trump term or this first year of Trump's second term. So I think it's important to...
It's truly incredible everything you just said about you and Eugene both, about how literally the ICE stuff is essentially a minority view in this country. And the Democrats are trying to co-opt it. But, the darling of the Democratic Party does remain, symbolically at least, Hillary Clinton. She represents everything it stands for. So, yeah, what do you make of that attitude she just expressed?
Yeah, she's actually proud of their record deportations. And in fact,
they didn't kill anybody, apparently. They did it without killing American white people
except
in the
migrants.
Yeah.
It doesn't count.
The whole border militarization project has killed a lot of people, actually, coming into the country, sent them into very dangerous situations, led to the greater reliance on the sort of cartels and coyotes and all the rest. And people have died in ICE custody, lots of people, because they've always had torturous conditions. You don't know all their names, and they haven't become, their faces aren't on placards, but they had families just like anyone else. So it's totally false, first of all. There is a difference to what Trump is doing compared to Obama that it would have to be a whole episode basically on how deportation numbers get counted and so forth. But the main point here is they're proud of it. They're proud of their deportation numbers, and they want to actually be the deporter in chief, but the humane deporter in chief. And that's basically what she's saying. We can do detention and family separation in a very humane way. The immigration system is, in fact, totally broken. It's almost impossible to migrate legally from many different countries. It's very hard to change one's status. There are big problems that have existed, but both parties have basically taken the tack of scapegoating the immigrant community rather than passing immigration reform. And the fact of the matter is that huge sections of the U.S. Economy rely on immigrant labor, and both parties have facilitated that. And it's not out of any concern for immigrants. In fact, these are the same politicians that will be owning and investing in these companies that rely on immigrant labor that'll turn around and run for office on the basis of the immigrant problem. So this is as old as American history, that you rely on immigrant labor while you then scapegoat it for political purposes. So both parties have played a big part in that. And it's worth remembering always, because when Trump is doing something so horrific, it can make almost anyone seem humane in comparison, even Hillary Clinton. But she is not. And, these people are straight up killers also.
Yeah, no, really just shocking that she would say that. The thing that's also shocking to me is that people clapped. Like, what?
It was like a few people were like, are we for this? Have you listened to it? It was like, there's some confusion in the room.
Yeah, it's an international audience. Well, yeah, there's so much to it. As you said, we'd have to have several other episodes, and we will have several other episodes. Dr. Ben Becker, as always, pleasure to have you here to help us break through all these different pieces. Thanks for joining us on
Breakthrough. I heard what you did there. Thank you.
Rania?
Very cute. I don't know if I had to characterize Hillary Clinton as anything, I think it would be like a super predator. That just word comes to mind,
Yeah. And it's a good way to turn it around on her, quite frankly, which that's what she called young black males. We're talking about young men. Just don't even get me started on the Clintons.
Projection, some might say.
Yeah. Well, Rania, I know we're coming close to the close. I don't even know if my internet is working correctly.
You froze for a second, but you're back now.
I was going to say, I know we're coming to the close. Sorry, you can hear me.
I can.
You know what? Maybe we should just close the show because I don't know if I can hear myself.
You can't hear me. Oh, no. Technological gremlins.
Look, it's coming in and out, so there's no point in me trying to make some long point. I wanted to say something about Marco Rubio's ridiculous comments at the Munich Security Conference, but I'd rather
I mean, you're coming through fine right now, but if you feel like you'd like to try, and we'll see if the gremlins come or not, I'll let you know.
Sure. Thank you. It's just like, you can see like the thing it's telling you don't have good internet, so you just don't even know.
Oh, no. Okay, I see. God, yeah. I don't understand the first world.
Listen, neither do I, and the amount of money I'm paying them right now, it's a little ridiculous that there's any question whatsoever, but that's just the world that we live in. Billions and billions of dollars for war and ice, and somehow my internet doesn't work despite the fact that I'm paying them an arm and a leg. Either way, I thought we had a great show and hit a number of very important points, which we will continue to do moving forward. Anything you want to leave our listeners with, viewers, or maybe listeners too, before we go?
Yeah, I want to remind everybody that we are an independent media outlet here at Breakthrough News, which means we are supported by our audience. That's how we're able to grow. That's how we're able to produce. That's how we're able to have video editors and social media people and just have a team at Breakthrough News that can bring you the truth about the world when, it's a real uphill battle against all this, corporate monopolies that are consolidating more and more around information and media. So all that's to say, if you are able to, please consider becoming a member of Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/breakthrough news. You can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch. Also, make sure you smash the like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm. And be sure that you're subscribed to Breakthrough News at BT Newsroom on all social media outlets. But make sure you're subscribed here on YouTube. Make sure you have notifications on. Hit that bell. Push all so that you get a notification whenever we post new content. And like, subscribe, share, do all the things to help keep us going and growing. And that's all I have to say, Eugene. That's my spiel.
Well, it's a great spiel, and I appreciate it as always. I appreciate all of our viewers. Shout out especially to all of our existing patrons. For myself, for Rania, for the whole Breakthrough News team, we will see you next time.
Revolution never turns and destroys everything that gets in its way.